You know, I started recording this, got about 10 minutes in, and then this giant orange asshat. There was just this notification came out of nowhere on my screen that this guy has something to say and is probably going to declare some kind of national emergency. And so I said, you know what? Fine. Let's stop for a second and let's actually hear what this muppron has to say. And so Slapnuts-in-Chief, can a toupee get the coronavirus? Anyway, so this guy starts talking, and of course we're talking about President Trump. And he does declare a state of national emergency due to COVID-19. Which, by the way, got a lot of great response from the episode that I did on that a couple weeks ago. And I'm glad that anyone got anything useful out of it. I'm honored. That was, of course, an episode by request of a great Sovereign Tech listener. And always feel free to put in a request. I'm not going to be able to guarantee that I can get to everything that I get asked about. But I certainly, when it's something that is at this level of visibility, and I guess we'll say importance, it's important to talk about, right? It's important to get into. It's good to get into. So anyway, we got some great stuff to get into for your Zomia ONE Underground only Q&A. Some big questions, a couple of really big questions to get into. But I want to take a second to talk a little bit about what Slapnuts-in-Chief had to say. And I got to tell you, it was like watching corporatism in real time. I mean, they had the guy, like the CEO of Target. They had, all these different CEOs coming up, and then you had varying politicians, and they're all just like, well, we're going to respond to this, and we're on top of this, we're making this happen, blah blah blah, and they were all just patting each other on the back. I think I saw some handshaking, which I thought we weren't supposed to do that. It was disgusting. I wanted to jam a pencil in my ear, quite frankly, but not to take away from the seriousness of what's going on. Now, as I talked about, was that episode 364? I think episode 364, where it was Have a Corona, was the title of Sovereign Tech. I had said at that time. Now, the real dangers that this can mutate. And it is the type of virus that lends itself to, mutating, as I understand it. There's that very real concern, but that the very real concern, the one that you will not be able to avoid, is the economic one. And regardless of the reality, the perception, as I discussed in that episode, the perception is what really matters, and people's perception, well, all you got to do is go to just about any grocery store and look at the complete lack of shit tickets available, right? The complete lack of toilet paper. And there's your perception. Amazingly, the Bitcoin price, I could not believe. A hell of a time to buy, like my grandfather would always say, where there's smoke, there's salmon. To see the number 4 in front of the Bitcoin price is remarkable, to say the least. We live in interesting times. That's for sure. In fact, wow, this is really, speaking of interesting times, I got a notification in front of me. Again, these goddamn things. Talk about the cancer of, well, I don't want to say the cancer, but talk about the, whatever, it's a bad thing. But this notification, I can't believe it. This is actually from eBay. Now, I buy a lot of course, people know. In fact, this is another subject I could get into right now that I'll probably bring up in a second. Again, we do have 2 huge subjects I really do want to spend time on for our Q&A. But I actually got a notification from eBay saying just for you, and it's a recommendation of a book. Like I said, or like I was going to say, people know I buy a lot of like rarer books or books that aren't in ebook format, and I get them turned into ebooks and make them available for everybody. just to be a bit of a preserver. You'll understand the importance of that in a minute. But here's one: The Coming Global Superstorm by Art Bell and Whitley Strieber. I have no idea what that book is, but that sounds awfully fitting, and certainly is something. I mean, I do like Art Bell, and Whitley Strieber. Is that the guy that wrote War Day? Boy, that's a hell of a read, man. It's a book from the 80s about it has to do with nuclear stuff, but anyway, check that one out. But I might end up actually picking up that book, and look, only $3. Boy, can you go wrong? Free shipping. How about that? Anyway, that was The Coming Global Superstorm. That's very interesting. Anyway, so yeah, the economic aspects of this are frankly unavoidable, and as I said, are part of the, if not the greatest danger, certainly the greater danger to come out of, or one of the greater dangers to come out of this whole situation. There's a part of me, I mean, the way that most companies are reacting, like actually the company that really, so, E3 canceling, whatever. E3 was, even gaming journalism is admitting that E3 has long been irrelevant anyway. It's been around for 30 some odd years. This is the first time it's ever been canceled. It's basically meaningless anyway. The Arnold Classic, I was amazed that canceled this year. We have so many different, the NBA, the NHL, this isn't the first time the NHL hasn't, run through, for a season, of course. I remember when I was a teenager, I think, and I might've actually cared about sports at the time, but, I seem to recall that it shut down because of a strike or something for a season, but, South by Southwest, of course, that's not going, so quick, I have like 3 points I want to bring up here. The one that really threw me for a loop, and this is where things get a little interesting, is actually a company that I just recently applauded for their business model, which is No Starch Press. No Starch Press does a lot of coding books and just some of the best books on technology and computers in general that you can find anywhere. I am a big fan. Have many of their books myself. In fact, I'm looking at one of my favorites right in front of me on my shelf in the studio here, The Ultimate Guide to IRC, Internet Relay Chat. Big fan. Which, by the way, I put the, of course, I'm using Kiwi for it, but on Zomia1.com, I actually put the IRC channel back. You can find it there. There's a couple other things I added there that I'm working on. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this company came out and said, okay, we're going to ship out the rest of the print orders that have come in, and they do pre-orders and everything. I've pre-ordered many books from them in the past. But we're going to go to digital only after that. And and that's it. Like they're going completely digital only. They are completely, because what I applauded them for was that, okay, they'd make the print book, and the quality of their print books is phenomenal. You instantly know when you're holding a No Starch Press book, because it just has a very unique feel, and a good one. And they would give you the print book, and for free, you would get the ebook. It was a brilliant model. And and they didn't say, well, for the next couple weeks, we're going to run this way. No, they just completely changed their business model. Now, it's important to understand, and this is a failing that I think a lot of anarchists, libertarians, activists go down pick your ism, okay? That I think this is a mental failing that people fall into. And that is, either they think that there's one person puppeteering, pulling the strings, or one group pulling the strings, or maybe they think that there's multiple groups pulling the strings, but they all sort of have a similar agenda. Or they think that there's one agenda, or they think that there's one bit of reasoning, or one force behind everything that's going on. Again, there's no need, and I don't necessarily mean any kind of supernaturalism in any of that. To think that there's one reason, bottom line, we can just call it a reason, that there's one reason for any actions being taken or for anything going on is a complete logical mental failing on the part of, well, all kinds of people, not even people that just subscribe to a specific ism. Okay. I mean, there are companies who I'm sure are genuinely concerned and affected that are not part of any agenda whatsoever. They might just, might have a significantly smaller scale, whatever, that are absolutely, because they are either buying into or they see it as a reality or they have whatever forms of proof they need that this is going to affect their industry. And so they are moving to a different business model, or they are telling their people to stay home or whatever. Okay. Right? That's happening. Are there companies who also, keyword, also are going to take advantage of this to perhaps do a complete 180 in their business model, or to, use it as justification to do X, Y, Z? Yes. Does that mean that every company that's buying into this, or that is taking action, I should say, based on COVID-19 is somehow nefarious, or is somehow, bullshitting everybody, or is doing, no. The universe is far too dynamic for that to be the case. There are people who are acting out of genuine goodwill. There are people who are acting out of, total self-interest. Of course, I would argue everything's out of self-interest, but it's a matter of, enlightened or unstructured self-interest, I guess you could say. There's a lot going on here. There is not just one reason, and anybody, I swear to fuck, if I see somebody who puts out a YouTube video or does any other horse shit like that says, well, the truth about COVID-19, or even the reality of COVID-19, the only reality about COVID-19 is that everybody's an individual, every company acts differently, and not everybody does everything for the same goddamn reasons. There's your reality. For someone to come out and say they've got the whole truth and nothing but the truth of what is behind all of this is a goddamn liar. Not only that, they are almost as harmful as any virus. They're engaging in viruses of the mind, which that's another thing too. But, all right, let's. This is one of the other points I wanted to get into. Let's do this. Now, longtime listeners know I'm not a big fan of the term predictive programming, because I think that term, along with psychological operations, get used by people who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about, have no experience in even the concepts, and they just use it basically willy-nilly. And they will go so far as to suggest that, the original series of Star Trek was predictive programming, and all these other things are predictive programming. No, no. Not in the way they think, and certainly once you get to their conclusions. And it's important whenever somebody says to you, that they think something is predictive programming, ask them what their conclusions are. And then you can look at for example, say with like the original series Star Trek, you can look into the making of the show. And you can find out, like, within that, okay, but is there something within the making of the show that somehow disproves the conclusion that this is predictive programming? And if there is, you know that they're full of shit when they claim this sort of thing. And with Star Trek, certainly that's the case. For example, there were so many things that were originally supposed to be part of the show, and we know why they weren't a part of the show. And it certainly wasn't because the RAND Corporation said no. It had nothing to do with that at all. For example, people were supposed to be smoking on the Enterprise. There was supposed to be a pastor or priest on the Enterprise, and so on. If you want... Well, anyway, we are going to get into predictive programming here. And is modern Star Trek a part of it? That's another conversation entirely. But a lot of past claims, I think, is pure crap. But yeah, entertainment today, I do feel a lot of it is very agenda-based, which is part of why I can't stand it. But we'll get into that. So one of the things going on, with COVID-19 is that a lot of people are basically being forced to work remotely. That didn't work remotely before. Now me, I've worked remotely for many years now. I'm very, very used to it. And so it's not a major shift for me, but I can understand where for a lot of other people it would be. And it's a big change. Also, I know that with colleges, there are lots of students who are going to be taking remote classes coming up soon. This is very much, I mean, there's a part of me, I could put on my tinfoil hat, and I am speculating here and being very clear about the fact that I am speculating. There's a part of me that wonders if there is some kind of agenda, some higher level agenda going on here from the powers that be. It's to basically just force everybody into, kind of the everything's digital, everything's online internet future. And I mean, what would be the real proof for me of that, where I would take it outside of the realm of speculation, is if a lot of bank branches suddenly started closing down and saying, yeah, we're moving to 100% online banking. Then I'd say, oh yeah, okay, this is definitely one of the agendas going on with COVID-19. That does not mean, again, you have to keep in perspective. There is not just one reason. There is not just one thing. There is not just one force behind all this, blah, blah, blah. That is just one group taking advantage of this and getting everybody into, eliminating much of the analog world, which, as we've been discussing for at least the past 2-3 years on Sovereign Tech, is actually a bad thing. We want things to be not on the big bad internet. Okay, we actually want to go in the opposite direction of everything going digital and online. We really, or at least I do. If you don't agree with me, you don't agree with me. But, we've talked for years about the war on cash. And I don't mean the greenback. I mean the idea of having money that is in some way easily transferable, something that you can actually hold in your hand, and, that is pseudonymous at the very least. Okay. Now, understand, that's not a knock against Bitcoin. Again, you don't want a monoculture. You don't want just one thing, right? This is people fall too much into concepts of the package deal, where you think, well, X is bad, so is Y and Z. No. You've got to open up your fucking minds, okay? And I don't mean, I know my listeners are intelligent. I'm talking about everybody else. Get out of this notion that there is one agenda, that there is one thing going on, that there is one purpose, that there is only one bad actor, or, even that every actor that buys into something or that follows a certain narrative is somehow bad. None of that is true. I know we live in such a complex world, and this complexity is actually what allows for things like COVID-19 to thrive. Okay, but we live in such a complex world. We want to eliminate the complexity, we as human beings, because it's just how our brains operate. And, sure, we engage in pattern recognition, but we want to simplify it. We want to find, okay, what is that one solution that can solve all of this? This is a major failing. Even anarchists fall for this, where they say, well, we just got to get rid of government. No, as you saw on, if you watched President Trump, give his national emergency speech today, right? If you saw that, you would have noticed, again, who is he bringing up? He wasn't just having other politicians come in and talking. He wasn't having just doctors come. For some reason, he had the CEOs of fucking Target and all these other companies, show up, and they're all just in one big circle jerk. Again, it's corporatism. So if you only think government's the problem, you're completely missing the fact that, these companies, they're all, again, it's a circle jerk. They're all sucking each other's cocks. Do not fall for thinking there's just one thing behind all of this. That is the most important thing. That's the most important point that I could bring up here. So, and with Dow Jones, we live in, again, like I said, we live in very, very interesting times. And, is this being used to prep everybody for the digital, and that's just going to more dystopia, right? That's just, William Gibson's sprawl, which is what I predicted for a while. Is it about that? Maybe, again, like I said, I'm very, very open to that possibility. There's a lot of possibilities that I'm open to as far as what's going on here. Is this a test? One thing, and here's point 3 that I wanted to bring up. Okay. And then we can move on to some of our bigger subjects, even though we've already gone 20 minutes in. This whole scenario, regardless of how real or dangerous or what's perception or what anything is, It doesn't matter what it shows is how fucking fragile civilization is. I remember reading where Gene Roddenberry, was basically saying, he said, and this was in the 70s, he was saying how fragile our civilization is. He says, all you have to do is cut off the water to a town and, it would fall apart. And he wasn't wrong then, but it's amazing. We think that we have, everything's, on the internet, everything's electronic, everything's redundant, and, we can verify and blah, blah, blah. All it takes, regardless of how you feel about COVID-19, all it takes is the perception of what's going on. And, look, when these conferences shut down, or these conventions or these events or whatever shut down, I mean, there's whole businesses that rely on like half of their yearly revenue to come in from when South by Southwest shows up, or when the Arnold Classic shows up, or they're reliant upon E3, or they're reliant upon whatever. I mean, like the ramifications of this, it's not simple. It's not just, that event shut down. No, an entire city and the people within it might have lost out on, millions of dollars. Who knows what jobs are going to end? And not every business is going to be able to, be as agile to where they can just tell everybody to stay home. What if that becomes a mandate of this, national emergency? And it might, because, Slapnuts-in-Chief was coming right out and saying, it's like, yeah, this is going to give us emergency powers to bypass various laws, which of course just proves the anarchist position that laws are bullshit, right? It's very, frankly, it's very Caesar of him, to say, well, there's the barbarians at the gates and we've got to take extreme measures to do it. Hell, it even sounds, if you want to get Star Wars about it, sounds like Palpatine, doesn't it? The Clone Wars are here, but of course, it's just a virus. It's amazing. You don't even need a boogeyman, or you don't need like a human boogeyman, right? And suddenly, boom, amazing emergency powers are getting enacted. That's how, and people believe it, or at least some do, enough do, that are taking action upon it. And it just shows how fragile this whole thing is. All right, last point that I want to bring up with this. I could not believe. Do you know the first company that Chump congratulated and thanked for helping us get through this? Google. And he's like, yeah, Google's going to make a great website, going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And in fact, it was the only one that he really brought up by name. And I don't know what the deal is, because maybe somebody from Google couldn't be there to be a representative or something. For a brief moment there, and I'm not going to get into explain why of all of this. There's a part of me that wondered if Google was actually really controlling the spread of information about this, which colors all of the perception, which colors the actions that everybody is taking, rational or otherwise. A part of me wondered, is this just, is Google bolstering COVID-19 just so that they can get their gas tax breaks again, so they can fly around in their private jets? Because remember, that got ripped away from them. They were getting like a tax break for the gas for their private jets, and they freaked the fuck out and they went to Washington about it. And it's like, is that what this is all about? Is this so that they have justification? Because if you can't go to the airport, or if you're told not to go to the airport, don't shake hands, don't get, in large groups of people and all that, the argument for private jets comes up pretty quickly. But anyway, I think that I'll say this much, and this is where I don't think I need so much of a tinfoil hat. The connection, because now we're going to have drive-through testing stations. That was part of the whole point of this meeting, or of this, not meeting, but this not a State of the Union, but this address. That's what I mean to say. This address from the Slapnuts-in-Chief. That was kind of the main thrust, is that, for the past couple of weeks, we've been working on this and we're all ready. We are basically going to have McDonald's for getting a swab to see if you have a coronavirus. Now, admittedly, Chump was saying not everybody needs to do it, and he didn't want everybody to do it. I don't buy that for a second. I think they absolutely do want everybody to do it. They just don't want everybody to rush the system and break it by everybody showing up and having lines around. I mean, you know what it's like when the McRib comes back in town, right? At McDonald's, the line around the fucking block. Well, they don't want that to happen, but you better believe they want everybody to jump on it. And they want everybody taking this stuff. And that's bothersome in itself. And, with Google helping set a lot of this up, okay, by having the website where you can register and do so much more, the connection between Google and 23andMe, that becomes far more interesting and, dare I say, far scarier. And we've been raising that flag for many years on Sovereign Tech. So that bothered, as soon as he said Google, I was like, oh, no, this isn't good. This isn't good. And I cracked a joke with somebody, not that this is all funny, but I cracked a joke with somebody. It's like, you see, but if Chump had made a deal with Amazon instead of Google, they would have been delivering those tests by drone. Fuck. Anyway, so there's a little update on what's happening with COVID-19 and some of my thoughts. And I did my best to, express when I was speculating and when not. So hopefully, I don't know. Well, anyway, you can tell me what you think about what I said. Of course, go to the Telegram group where actually the conversation around COVID-19 is pretty hot and is happening often. So a great place to continue that, as well as many other great conversations. And in fact, my first question that I have here came from the Telegram group, and I want to get into it. And it has to do with a subject that we brought up recently, which is about hedonism, or particularly we were actually talking about Stoicism. And again, hedonism, ethical hedonism, or Epicureanism, is often seen as the antithesis to Stoicism. And that's not unfair, even though we did bring up that really, if you had a Venn diagram, there are many points where the sphere of hedonism and the sphere of Epicureanism anyway, and the sphere of Stoicism would actually touch quite a bit. They would meld very nicely. But regardless, let's get into the question here. Oh, and you know what? In fact, the person who asked this also brought to my attention, speaking of Amazon, that they are actively engaging in banning books. One of them being, in fact, a book that we reviewed on a Q&A in the past. That being Might is Right by Ragnar Redbeard. In fact, Trevor Blake's version of it, which is the authoritative edition, which admittedly and they claimed, Amazon or the publisher, whatever, is claiming that we'll have a conversation around this soon because I think it's important. But they're claiming copyright infringement, which I think is hilarious because Trevor Blake hit me, the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, with a copy. He slapped me with copyright stuff. Anyway, I've talked about that before. I'm not going to cover that right now. We'll have that conversation around what Amazon is doing as far as banning books, because Bezos is very clear that, he would not engage in that. But I guess that's not true anymore. So, all right, I want to get into this question around hedonism, and then we have another interesting question to get into. But here we go. So I'll read it again. This is from the Telegram group. At Sovereign, are you familiar with the experience machine thought experiment by the minarchist Robert Nozick? Essentially, in 1974, he proposed a refutation to the core premise of hedonism. The mechanics of the thought experiment are well put in the Wikipedia article, and there's a link for it. I'll put that in the show notes. And again, it's the experience machine, but it essentially boils down to the conversation between Agent Smith and Cypher in the Matrix. Using that outline, Wikipedia gives the formal argument as person one, if experiencing as much pleasure as we can is all that matters to us, then if we will experience more pleasure by doing X than by doing Y, we have no reason to do Y rather than X. And then person two says, we will We will experience more pleasure if we plug into the experience machine than if we do not plug into the experience machine. Or maybe that's point 2. Anyway, then it's C1. We'll just keep going with it. If all that matters to us is that we experience as much pleasure as we can, then we have no reason not to plug into the experience machine. And then P3, person 3, we have reason not to plug into the experience machine. And then C2 is experiencing as much pleasure as we can is not all that matters to us. So anyway, I'll explain better what this means. I'm just reading off the question here. I have to say that this is by far the best argument striking against the heart of hedonism that I have come across. It seems to show that in this scenario, at least, truth in accordance with reality is the real intrinsic good and not happiness/pleasure. I would be very interested in hearing your thoughts on this, and if you are familiar with any ways to overcome this or other similar issues facing the basic premise of hedonism or Epicureanism. Feel free to respond here or a Q&A. So I will respond here, obviously. But this is an interesting thought experiment. In fact, actually, the experience machine is also an interesting thought experiment it's a thought experiment as it pertains to simulation theory, as in the idea that we're just living inside of a computer simulation. So basically, the thought experiment goes down again. Yeah, using the argument or the conversation that Cypher has with Smith in the first Matrix movie, where Cypher basically ends off with ignorance is bliss and bites into the steak, right? That is a good example. And that scene, to understand, that scene is actually in there on purpose because the Wachowskis are huge fans of philosophy, or students, dare I say. So, that fits in with that. And it becomes... The Matrix movies themselves, or certainly the first one, does raise the question of, what's more important, bliss or truth? And that's what the experience machine is trying to get to the heart of. Okay. And Neo's rejection of the Matrix, even though one could argue is that he is quote unquote happier in the Matrix, is representative of the idea that knowing the truth is preferable. Okay. Experiencing reality is, even if reality is a hell, is preferable to a simulation of heaven. Now, I don't disagree with that notion overall. And there has actually been research done to suggest that yes, people do have a hunger, a thirst for truth. I mean, I would argue that much of humanity is ultimately is a truth seeker at heart. Granted, I think a lot of people get beaten into a certain submission to the status quo, to not wanting to ruffle feathers and to wanting to. I mean, and it kind of speaks to this idea of wanting to be left alone. But my point in saying all of this is that, as with many things, okay, just like you can make very simplistic arguments against Stoicism, I like to think I made very reasoned arguments that apply to the very core of what Stoicism is and what Stoicism says, okay? But what often people do is they make very simple arguments, the simplest that they can, that way they can write something off that they don't like, right? Okay. This, the thought experiment of the experience machine, is a very simple argument against ethical hedonism because it's not digging deeper. I mean, yes, there are some brands, shall we say, of hedonism that the experience machine certainly does speak against and certainly does disprove, right? But then there are many aspects or different brands of hedonism, I would argue, including Epicureanism, that the experience machine is not really relevant to, and it doesn't really speak to what hedonism is about. For example, an aspect of, or one brand, one type of hedonism, okay, just like there's different types of anarchism, there's different types of Christianity, right? I mean, you could almost call it a denomination if you want. How about we do that? One denomination of hedonism that I do not agree with, and I have no problem calling myself a hedonist, is utilitarianism. Okay, right? Bentham, Stuart Mill, go on. Utilitarianism is the very, in a simple definition, is whatever makes the largest amount of people happy, that is the ultimate good and the goal that you should strive for. Now, I think in general, governments push for this. Corporations also, or businesses often also push for this, right? How can we, make the most amount of people happy while at the same time keeping our profit margins up, blah, blah, blah. I mean, utilitarianism is something that a lot of the civilization that we exist within runs off of. And utilitarianism is what I would actually argue. I was saying earlier how people get beaten into, or get basically enlightened self-interest beaten out of them. They get beaten into not necessarily a submission, but they get beaten into a certain utilitarianism, which, I mean, is a type of submission. This is why this conversation is so complex. So the experience machine within the thought experiment itself has a fatal flaw in that by its very nature, okay, it is not really referencing the individual. It is referencing a we, okay? It is really speaking to a more utilitarian form of hedonism, in my opinion. But we can kind of debunk it that way, but that's not really like knocking. Okay, that's not really saying, well, wait a minute, how does hedonism prove the experience machine wrong? Because like I said, I do think that humans naturally, okay, when they haven't been beaten into a utilitarianism, naturally do thirst and hunger for the truth. They want reality, because reality, through the process of evolution and what it took for us as humanity to get here, relied upon a very firm grasp on reality. It's the only way that we survived. And we have survived some serious shit, from the Toba supervolcano to world wars. I mean, go down the fucking list, to COVID-19, hopefully. If there, I want to, I want to talk more about COVID-19 and get a little conspiratorial with the message of hope and how that relates to COVID-19. But, the message of hope that gets hammered into people in entertainment, but whatever, I'm not going to go there right now. We're talking about this question. I have another question I want to get into. So certainly one of the biggest voices that I would say for hedonism, even if she didn't want to necessarily call it that, in recent years, in the past 100 years, would be Ayn Rand. And I think that there is a reason that Ayn Rand did not say, I mean, she might have been quoted at certain points as saying this, but her what she really meant, and what she would, the terms she would more carefully use, especially later on in life, is that the intrinsic good of the human being, of the individual, isn't happiness, but the heroic life. Now, happiness comes with the heroic life, she would say, but that is what she would put. I mean, like, and the heroic life would have, productive achievements a part of that, and there's a couple other elements that she would list off as far as that goes. But I think there was a reason that particularly she did not use the term happiness when she was talking about what is the intrinsic good of humanity, and she would instead say the heroic life. Now, she's really, as she did often, she's really just stealing a metric ass ton from Nietzsche, from Friedrich Nietzsche. And I want to talk about the pleasure paradox. That is the pleasure paradox is actually the most important. If we're going to say, how does the experience machine get debunked? It gets debunked by the pleasure paradox. Okay. And we're going to talk about that. But I want to read a couple quotes to you from Nietzsche. The first is from the Antichrist, from his book, The Antichrist. And the second is from The Will to Power. And this is really important. And you're going to find out we need to be really careful how we define the term power, but let's run with it. So again, this is from Nietzsche. What is good? Everything that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power, power itself. What is bad? Everything that is born of weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. So here we go. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. Okay? Now, the second quote here, it is significantly enlightening to substitute for the individual happiness, for which every living being is supposed to strive, with power. Joy is only a symptom, or joy or happiness is only a symptom of the feeling of attained power. One does not strive for joy. Joy accompanies. Joy does not move. And this gets into the pleasure paradox. Okay. The pleasure paradox is simply this. And this is another thing. This fits so well with what we were talking about earlier. The idea that people, think, oh, there must be one reason, or, that X equals Y every time, and so on. Most people have a very hard time accepting the concepts of paradoxes. Like there's a reason we have the term paradox, because we know there are things that logically don't exactly fit, but they do at the same time. We cannot argue the cause and effect, okay, at the heart of a paradox. For example, the paradox of egoism, as I call it, is that I am the most important being in the universe, but so are each of you. Now that's not possible, right? Like it's a paradox. One person in a finite universe cannot be the most important being, and then everyone else is also the most important being, but you are, right? And that's a whole other conversation that we'd have to get down. But that is what I call the paradox of egoism. So the pleasure paradox, which is a well-known philosophical concept, I'm not making that up, okay? I mean, there's ways of explaining it in that, like there's old sayings, you can't enjoy the sweet without the sour. Again, it goes to that, the feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. Pleasure, happiness, if you want to call it that. Again, the term happiness is kind of loaded, right? There are problems with that. Yes, the experience machine speaks against happiness, as in you must constantly feel pleasure, but then the experience machine is only addressing a very simplistic notion and definition of the word happiness. As to where pleasure, again, itself is a paradox that comes with, again, resistance overcome. Pleasure comes with, it's not something you don't chase pleasure directly. Like Nietzsche was saying, joy accompanies. It is something that comes along with the action that you have taken, right? And if you have to go, when you go through some shit, there is pleasure at the end of that. That is the reason you went through the shit. Okay? It is not something that you encounter directly. You cannot, if X is pleasure, you cannot do there's no way to just grab X. You have to understand, pleasure and pain are culminations of things. They are not a thing themselves. You cannot measure pleasure. And this is where utilitarianism becomes a problem. Okay? You can't measure, you can measure pain to a degree, but even pain, and again, this speaks to the concept of the individual and why utilitarianism is bullshit, okay? There are individuals who absolutely take pleasure in what another individual would consider to be pain. And there's nothing wrong with that because, again, it's not a singular thing. It is a culmination of events, of sensations, of thoughts, of so many different aspects of the human condition, okay, of experience, of consciousness. It is the culmination. It is not just one thing. So the experience machine is bullshit because it is suggesting that, again, it's breaking it down to X and Y, that if this can produce X instead of Y, you will never want to leave the machine that gives you X. But that doesn't make sense because you can't just be given X. You have to go through so much more to get to X. It is a culmination of the things. The experience machine is just, it's far too simplistic. It does not understand what happiness is. Now, this concept of power, okay, kind of like what Nietzsche's saying, that every, what is good, everything that heightens the feeling of power in man, the will to power itself. I've talked about this a few times in the past. People don't like it because when you hear the word power, what do you instantly think? Most people instantly think of one, just like where there's multiple types of hedonism. People instantly think of that there's only one kind of power, and that is power over. That's not true. Okay? Power over, me being intelligent. Okay? Now, a person can be wildly intelligent. They can sit in a room, read books all day long. They can be far more, they can have far more knowledge. They can have far more factoids in their brain than you do. Does that automatically give them a power over you? No, because they could sit in that room. They could never open their goddamn mouth. They could never act upon all of the factoids that they put into their brain. Okay? And then, so how could that possibly be power over? Right? I mean, and you want to go with the old terms? Knowledge is power. Knowledge does not have to be acted upon. It does not have to be used. It does not have to be applied. Okay? In fact, we have another term for applied knowledge. It's called wisdom. Knowledge does not have to be applied. That is an internal power. Things like confidence is an internal power. It is not a power over. You can choose how you react to confidence. Some people act with fear. Other people act with attraction. Some people, again, get the simplicity of these things out of the equation. That's the problem, is that people are far too simplistic with how they, how they want to explain things or how they want to denounce things. Power, especially the way that Nietzsche talks about it, and yes, have you had people like the Nazis and others bastardize what he was writing? Absolutely they have. Just as writing has been bastardized for thousands of years with, take your pick of the book. Right? And if you want a great example of how this can happen, I want you to read a science fiction book called The Canticle of Leibowitz, which is all about this holy order, okay, like in the future, in this post-apocalyptic future, that treats a guy's order for a bagel named Leibowitz, they treat it as something that came from the Delphic goddamned oracle, like it was the word of God or something. It was an order for a bagel with cream cheese. People can misconstrue shit. Anyway, it is abundantly clear that when you actually take the fucking time to think about it and to read about it, that Nietzsche was, and then there's the whole problem of where, some of his writing was actually his sister's and she was a Nazi, but whatever, that's another conversation. That much of what Nietzsche was, when he would talk about power, he was talking about internal power. That does not have to equate to power over. Okay? Would you believe it? There's also a thing known as power under. There are different aspects to the term power. One could argue that it's a shitty word. Even happiness is a shitty word. All of these things require context, better explanation, and so on. So while the experience machine, because we need to wrap this up, I want to get to the other question. While the experience machine, yes, certainly does denounce certain concepts of happiness and hedonism, it certainly doesn't denounce Epicureanism, and it does not denounce or debunk hedonism as a philosophy overall, because again, hedonism rests upon the pleasure paradox, which the pleasure paradox is basically, again, if I were to wrap it up in a simple saying, like, you can't appreciate the sweet without the sour. You can't even appreciate, it's kind of the wrong term. You can't experience the sweet without the sour. The pleasure paradox. You cannot experience, or you cannot, it's not that you can't experience, you can't acquire pleasure directly. That's the problem that the experience machine runs into, is that it doesn't understand that paradox. And that's why that's why it doesn't work. Again, the experience machine, it's not that it's untrue. It's just that it doesn't debunk hedonism. Okay, it is true. I do think, and again, there's been research done even in recent years that strongly suggests that yes, humanity can't even pursue pleasure if it's not in reality. Not really. Okay, so reality, not really. Anyway, speaking of pursuing pleasure, let's get to our next question, which I don't have to read the whole question. It has a very basic premise, but it falls under, and oh boy, is this going to be a topic. Do our pets have the right to pursue pleasure? Ooh, to pursue happiness, as it would be in the Bill of Rights, right? So we're probably going to end up running a little long on this episode to cover this, but it's important. I mean, the basic gist of the question was, is it better to keep a pet or eat it? But this is a conversation that's coming up quite a bit. There have been books written on the subject in the past 15 years, I want to say. A lot of research done on it. The scientific world is really reacting to this, and I've actually worked with companies, just in the past couple of years, where they are responding to the fact that there is a lot of pressure from the scientific community, not environmentalists, not blah, blah, blah. I mean, even though you could argue, well, the scientific community is environmentalists, blah, 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 not from the vegans, not from whatever, but of finding other life forms, or debatable life forms, right? To test, say, drugs on and other things other than mice and rats. Okay. And this is a big deal. If you don't know about this, I mean, read up, because this is a major conversation happening in the scientific world. And you may be wondering, what does this have to do with keeping pets? Well, we'll get to it. Now, before I go any further, this is important for me to point out. Okay. I am in no way saying that I am not telling you what to do. Okay. I am, as I often do on Sovereign Tech, I am just trying to get you to think. I am challenging you. Okay. And that's all, because I'm never going to force shit on anybody. I have a pet cat. I love pet cats. I've had a pet cat most of my life. I mean, and am I, would I have this pet cat that Ellen and I care for? Would, because suddenly I say to myself, well, having pets is unethical, would I, turn it loose? No. Once again, we have a conversation here that requires a lot of nuance, okay? And an understanding that even when we talk about pets in the general sense, there's not just one type of pet, right? I mean, you have pet fish. You could be like Rocky, and you have pet turtles, pet dogs, pet cats, pet birds, pet whatever, pet rocks, I guess. That's a whole other conversation. But you get my point. And, do the rules apply across the board for all of them? Well, that's something that we are going to explore. But keep in mind that there are different types. And when you have different types, yeah, all the rules aren't the same. Because, there is biology and evolutionary concepts to consider. Okay? So, the idea of owning a pet being unethical, okay, there's 2 points I want to start off with in conversation. Is, it being unethical is that you are somehow affecting its agency. Okay, you are affecting, the pet's agency, whatever that means ultimately. All right. And so we have to explore that. Then also there's the history of pet keeping, which is something to keep in mind. So when we say unethical, we mainly mean impinging on autonomy and agency. Okay. Are you in the way of something doing what it chose to do? Now, again, did choose. That is a major part of this initial debate. Okay. Is choosing. Are they choosing, or are they acting upon instinct? Those are two very different things. Then that's the difference between sentient and sapient, right? Sapient can choose. Sentient can act on instinct. Big concepts here, no doubt. Now, before I get into that, I want to touch on the history of pet keeping, because I think that colors a big part of this. So the history of pet keeping is... I don't think and I think I've said this recently, and this deserves a lot more exploration than we're going to get into here, but it's also well beyond just the scope of this subject. I don't think we understand just how much the world changed in the 1970s. In the 1970s, we basically had a second industrial revolution, as in things occurred, partly having to do with food, but then also I would argue the pet industry. Things occurred that changed the world, and most of us just don't remember. It happened very slowly and it kind of seeped in. It occurred that was as revolutionary as the Industrial Revolution, and as revolutionary as, say, the internet, right? So, and we don't think about it. We don't remember a time that we couldn't buy TV dinners. Not really. All right. Or we don't remember when TV dinners maybe didn't last as long in the freezer as they used to, or whatever. We don't remember when all these ingredients and all these like artificial sweeteners and whatever else and all this other shit started getting injected into our food. We don't know the exact time when suddenly food became, when it reached that threshold of where it became too processed. We don't know when that happened. I mean, we do now, but most of us didn't pay attention, is my point. We know that it happened in the 70s. Okay. Pet keeping. Pet keeping was actually exceptionally rare. Okay. This is something, and for an example, okay, here's something else people don't realize. This is a wild thing. When you look at old pictures pre-World War II of Americans, and in some of them, it's abundantly clear because it's a marriage and a husband and wife thing. The idea of wearing a ring when you were married, that wasn't a thing until World War II. In fact, there's still entire groups in America that don't practice it as part of their culture. In fact, the aforementioned, what we mentioned in this week's episode of Sovereign Tech, the Adventists, they don't wear rings. People didn't. You'll look at it, you'll know that they're married. They're married, but they don't wear rings. But now, most people can't imagine getting married without wearing rings, right? But that actually was commonplace. Now, how did that come in? It came in with the World War, and that's a whole other conversation on its own. But that's the thing. Just like pet keeping, it used to not really be pet keeping. Like the pet that you had, like say the dog you had on the farm, they were working animals. Okay. Even though they might not have been the oxen, or, they might not have been the cow, or they might not have been the goat or whatever that maybe you ate eventually or milked or whatever. Okay. They were still a working animal that had a purpose. Sure, you may have loved it and treated it very, very well, but it was a working animal. But even then, oftentimes those types of animals, say that were on the farm and that were working animals, if there was a problem of, again, we haven't gotten to this yet, but if there was a problem of agency, if there was a problem of autonomy, those animals more or less, kind of ran free. And that's an important thing to get into as well. And this is where it's really key that we recognize that we are dealing with pets is an abstract concept, and it's an abstract applied to a lot of different species. It's widely accepted that dogs kind of co-evolved with humans in a way, even if, I don't know, however many thousands of years ago. I don't want to say a few 100,000 years ago, but it's certainly, tens of thousands of years ago, dogs started to co-evolve with us. The idea of a dog being man's best friend, that kind of happened by evolution, because the dogs, who may have been more wild at the time, thousands of years ago, would follow humanity's trail of death and would eat the bones, right? Or would gnaw on the bones of what we were leaving behind. But then almost a symbiotic relationship grew out of that. Okay. And dogs ended up staying with us. And, they would help us in our other endeavors as we go into the, the Neolithic and so on. Okay. Now, cats probably didn't evolve that way. Fish, obviously, goldfish certainly didn't co-evolve with us or evolve in that way. So that's where part of the difference is. Dogs started hanging around humanity as a matter of, if they have autonomy and agency, as a matter of autonomy and agency. Even out of instinct, frankly, they were starting to follow us around. Now, does that give us the right to, breed dogs into poodles? That is another question. But point being is that, again, how these creatures, how all these differing creatures that many of which now we keep as pets, how they came into our human sphere of control, or influence at least, are differing between. Okay. So this idea, though, of like the pet industry, like the concepts of a Petco, or that you go to a pet store and buy something, this is totally a product of the 70s. It became a marketable thing. It became a fashionable thing, part of which had to do with the economy doing very well, among other things. But before that, I mean, yes, you could find where like rich families had poodles and they had varying animals and everything, but they had those animals to basically more or less like have a menagerie. Okay. And they might have, and certainly in the 70s, this is also when, and I know people want to point at the Gilded Age, but not really. In the 70s is when the idea that it was very comfortable, people started to earn very comfortable livings. Okay. And a lot of what people, I think, expect and what they think they deserve out of life, much of that actually came out of the economic situation of the 70s, which would actually kind of tank too, and then we'd have to go into the 80s. So you can't just pin it somewhere, but this is where it really started. Okay. The pet industry just barely existed. And there's whole books written on this matter that I've been actually reading recently, much of which, prepping actually for this question that got sent in, because, well, I wanted to know. So keeping pets as we understand it today, and now that, and having like these stores that sell desserts for pets, and that's all that this little shop does in California or wherever. I mean, all of this is incredibly new. It is not, and I've asked this many times, like I've been there. I have heard the conversations. In fact, it was with, I don't mean to single them out, but it was with some libertarians, and they were complaining about how stores are now wanting them to buy and reuse bags. And they're like, this isn't how it's meant to be. Blah, blah. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? The idea of having even paper bags and plastic bags, that's what, a few decades at best that has been a thing? How long has the grocery store even been around? To call anything that hasn't even been around for a century at best, to call that normal in the grand scheme of the human condition? Who the fuck are you, asshole? I use that example to say that what's normal, okay, like how do we define normal? That is ever-shifting sands. And something that is just like having a smartphone. Having a smartphone isn't normal. They've only been around, in their more modern incarnation since 2007 in their, the size of a brick, throw it through a window and watch it tear the wall apart. Those have been around since maybe the 80s where the consumers could buy them. I mean, that's not normal. That's not common. So this idea of, but it's amazing how quickly, civilization, like something new comes in, like the iPhone, and then suddenly everybody thinks, well, this is how it fucking works. I can't remember a time when this didn't exist. When, motherfucker, you're only 30. You did live at a time when these things weren't here. You were conscious at a time when these things weren't here. And that's the problem, is that we kind of trick ourselves into new normals all the time. Okay. And whatever the forces are behind that is a completely different conversation than what we're talking about now. But the idea of the pet industry and of keeping pets is incredibly new. It's barely 50 years old. Now, there are concepts that are similar to the idea of what we think of as keeping pets that have been around for a very long time. But the pet industry, as we understand it, is fairly new. Now, it's not around long enough to where we have, really altered, say, in a dramatic fashion, the lives or the biology, I should say, of these species. We've certainly altered the attitudes. For example, there are activists in this space of thinking that we shouldn't be keeping pets who, had pets, like would have a pet bird of some kind, and they actually set the bird free. And the person even admitted they knew, this activist, he knew, he's like, there's no way that bird could survive without me because it's always lived with me and I've always fed it. It cannot have the natural instincts anymore, or it can't have the honed natural instincts to fend for itself. It's going to get eaten. It's going to die. And I mean, and in a moment of intellectual honesty and emotional honesty, he said for himself, he says, really, I set that pet bird free for me, not for it, because it's going to go die. It's going to die from what I just did. And that's an important concept to keep in mind when we talk about this. Okay. Is that while we may not have biologically stunted some of these animals that we keep as pets, instinctually, we have, we've gotten rid of, say, some of their killer instinct or whatever else because, we've raised them in such comfortable environments. So that's something to consider in all of this. Now, my point in talking about the history of the pet industry is to suggest that keeping pets is not a normal thing. It is not something that has been done for a long time at all. Okay. The domestication of animals does not equate to you having a pet cat, to you having a pet whatever. All right. Okay. So we got that. Now let's talk about agency and autonomy and potential sapience in animals. I think a great example to bring up is the rat. And I mention this example often because I think it's the most interesting for a lot of reasons. We as humans often see rats as, and certainly if you like me, you grew up in New York City, you have a perception of rats as being the scum of the earth, like the lowest life form, next to insects, maybe. That's a whole other conversation too. Rats are actually incredibly intelligent, and we're discovering how intelligent they are, more so all the time. And this is what's brought up the major debate of, hey, can we use mice in experiments? Can we use rats in experiments? Because when we experiment on them to study them as creatures themselves, not to how can they help us make a better drug for humanity, we find out some really interesting stuff. Okay. And again, some of this research has only been done in the past decade. The idea that, and I bring this up all the time, the idea that rats have empathy, or, that they have a sense of empathy. How do we know this? Well, we know this because and there's some arguments to go back and forth on some of this, but we put rats in scenarios where, we'll have some in a maze, say we'll have some rats. And this isn't like The Beautiful Ones, right? There's Rat City. That's a very famous experiment. This stuff's much more recent. We'll have some rats that will be running around free. And then in the same area, but blocked off, we'll have rats that get trapped, essentially. And the test is to see, the rats that are running free, will they stop and try to do something to, say, free the unfree rat? Interestingly enough, they do. The rats will try to set free the rat that is not free, that has lost its basic, what you could argue would be its autonomy or agency, or its ability to act on its instincts. Either way, they will try to free it. Now, why is that happening? You have one side that will say, well, they're not really trying to set it free. It's not that they feel anything for the other rat. It's that they're just tired of it making all those annoying noises because it's trapped. So they're just kind of, they're not really setting it free. That's not what's going through their head. They just want the noise to stop. But certainly people do read into it as in, that it's not, that it is about setting free. And that argument can kind of go either way. So when you have a debate like that, what do? Further testing. And further testing is where things get, in my opinion, really interesting. So another test that was done on rats is, these are just examples. There's plenty more to go around. But like I said, I think rats are a great example because we think so little of them. Another test done on rats is where they would, kind of like try, and yes, the ethics of these tests, well, that's kind of what we're touching on here. But they would drown the rat, or they would try to drown the rat Okay. And then, but they wouldn't drown it. They'd set it free, but they'd start drowning it. Then they'd take another rat. Okay. And they would start to, they'd set up the scenario where that rat would be drowning. But they'd have in the same, not tank, but area, in the same area for the experiment, they would have another rat there they would have the rat there that previously experienced what it was like to drown. And amazingly, that rat that had the previous experience of drowning would try to rescue the rat that didn't have the previous experience but was drowning now. Now, they would put in other rats in the same scenario that didn't previously have the experience of drowning, and they would not react to saving the other rat right away. This experiment, I think, is one of the most interesting because it debunks a lot of the conclusions that rats aren't feeling empathy from the previous one when the rats were, say, just trapped and other rats were supposedly trying to set it free or were just tired of the noises. If rats were just tired of the noises, when the other rat is basically drowning or potentially could drown, again, it could still make sounds above the water. Your head's above water. This is how it is with the rats. Okay. You would have that happening. If rats just didn't like the sound of another rat in pain and so they just do whatever it took to fucking stop it, every rat, not just ones that had previous experience drowning or near drowning, and ones that didn't, all the rats would have tried to save the one that's drowning. But that's not what happened. It was only the rats that had the shared experience that seemed to have an understanding of the pain or the potential lethal scenario that the other rat is going through that, again, would engage in the rescuing. And this raises a lot of questions. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. There is an understanding of what is going on. There is an understanding of pain, right? There is an understanding, again, it appears there's an understanding, hey, this rat's in trouble. We got to do something about it. And that's where this idea, this is one of many experiments that is what has led to the conclusion that rats do feel some kind of empathy. Okay, because they express it certainly within their own species. Also, did you know rats laugh? They do. They laugh. We don't recognize it because, it's the sound that rats make, which frankly is horrible. But they do laugh. We know that now from research. Okay. Now, there's something to be said for that because I raise, this is another flag I raise often, which is we as humans, we like to attribute very human things to non-human things. Right? We like to anthropomorphize. We like to, say, well, like wolves get married when marriage is clearly a human concept, right? So you got to be careful with that. But there's been so much research done on this, especially since 2011. I think as best as we can understand our universe, yes, rats do have empathy. Okay. And they do seem to act upon like that. It's something a little more beyond instinct. Of course, this gets into an argument is where do biological functions and instinct, where do those two like stop being one or the other? Like where's the point where they branch off from each other? That's a big conversation to have as well. But if even the quote unquote lowest form of life on Earth, the rat, okay, and I put that in quotes, can engage and seem to feel these things, it raises, again, a lot of questions. What do cats feel? What do fish feel? What do all of these different animals, all these different species, do we have to question sapience, not just sentience, but sapience about a lot of them? This is big stuff. Now, so in a conversation like this, the common response is, so Stallion, what are you saying? That animals have rights? No, I don't think humans have rights. So obviously I don't think animals have rights. The notion of rights is a fallacious concept. Talk about things that you can't measure. Okay. Now we're talking about research here where you can measure empathy. You can measure empathy because empathy is a biological function. Rights are nothing. It's not, there's no biological basis for rights. It's not something that you can take a ruler to. It's not, they don't exist. Rights are a social construct. It is something that you may feel that you are like morally agreeing with on other people, but then morality itself is just a social construct. There is no such thing as morality. Show me, measure morality. Break out something, that can hit up the Planck scale and show me where morality is there. Right, exactly. It doesn't exist. Does what I'm saying to you exist? Yes, you could look at the sound waves. You can actually measure and engage the sound waves. So that's a thing. Rights don't exist. Okay? And I know that's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp. But now what does exist? Because, of course, the scary thing there, right, is that, well, without morality, we're all just going to kill each other. How little you think of us as humans. Yikes, that's scary. But anyway, what we do have are biological functions. Again, we have the same biological functions as human beings that keeps one rat that has the experience of potentially drowning to keep another rat from potentially drowning. It doesn't mean we're like naturally good, because good is its own problems. Okay. Like that whole notion of what's good. Again, we were clarifying that earlier when we were talking about hedonism, in fact. But admittedly, for lack of a better term, okay, humans do not want to, like humans that are in touch with their biology. And like I said earlier, many of us get it beaten out of us into a utilitarianism, which I would argue is unethical. Empathy is a natural reaction of ours. Okay. I don't want to get into like discussing emotions and all. I mean, there's so many problems with that, because even like terms that are supposedly scientific, like fear and others, actually have no measurable basis either. And they are just terms that were lifted from Victorian novels. So we don't want to necessarily go there, but we do have biological functions that when we look at those, okay, the expression of those biological functions is what is representative of the healthy human being, of the human condition. Okay, empathy, expressing empathy, acting empathetically is a natural function of the human condition. All right, it is a biological function. So no, we do not want to go and murder ourselves. This isn't, what are those stupid fucking movies? It doesn't matter. I can't think of the name of it. Is it The Purge? Those films? It's nonsense. So, where I think the failing where I think understanding comes in with all of this as to whether or not it's ethical to keep pets. Because the question becomes, okay, now there's certain biological functions that we've always had, but humanity was able to evolve into what it is for varying reasons. Okay. And we were able to evolve consciousness, very, very powerful expressions of consciousness for varying reasons. And certainly parts of that has to do with diet and other things, but there are reasons we were able to evolve that way. One of the reasons we were able to evolve that way actually is going to speak into the next point. And that is we didn't really have a natural predator. We did at certain points. Okay. But we were able to figure out ways to overcome our natural predators to where really they weren't natural predators anymore. Say the woolly mammoth or something like that, where we offed them as a species with stone knives and bearskins, more or less. I mean, we weren't the only reason, but certainly we had our hand in it. Okay. So too many people, again, this theme is coming up again in this Q&A, where people think there's only, that everything's black and white, or there's only one reason, there's this way and this way. They don't think about the complexities of everything. All right. I think a lot of people just think, well, you're either predator or you're prey. No, there is at the very least a third option, or there is a third possibility in existence. Okay. For life, you could be predator, you could be prey, or you could be a keeper, and potentially you could be the kept. Okay, so we could go with 4. That's the part that people don't think about. And it's not that humanity didn't have any predators that got us to where we are. It is that we really had no keepers. And in fact, if humanity is, shall we say, mentally, emotionally, right? Like I said, we got kind of beaten into a utilitarianism or whatever. If we are being stunted, it is because now we do have keepers. Unfortunately, it's other human beings. Now, I don't want to get into a conversation around, I mean, it's one that could be had. I don't want to get into a conversation around, is it because, there's humans that are sociopaths and they're the ones that are power over, like we were talking about earlier, people in government, whatever. That's another conversation entirely. But the point being is that we were able to evolve to this point, to where I can even have this conversation and we can consider these radical concepts because we had no keepers. Okay? We were not the kept. And so it does become a question. What are we holding back with other life forms when we become their keepers, say the keepers of our pets, and they become the kept? You could almost interchange those words when you think about it this way, is that pets and kept are like that they're interchangeable. It's an interchangeable concept. And if having a keeper keeps you from coming to full fruition of who you are, then being the kept or a pet is interfering with your autonomy, with your agency, or even if you don't have those, interfering with your instinctual expression, or perhaps at the base level of all of that, interfering with your potential. A word that exists outside of instinct, agency, and autonomy. I mean, it speaks to all three of those, but it's something, it's a bigger concept than even that. It gets in the way of potential. What potentials are we keeping our pets that we love so much? And we love them. There's no doubt about that. And I would argue that, if rats can feel empathy, then yes, your dog loves you. Yes, your cat can love you. Yes, they really can. I think they can feel that. Love is a very funny term too. That is also, it's love and fuck. Those two words can mean so many different things. So that becomes kind of an issue within itself. And I suppose I would have to take time to kind of explore that. But this idea, like we know when we have keepers, okay, when other humans are keeping us, we know how harmful that is to us as human beings. And as we learn more and more about the emotional lives of animals, or at the very least the potential emotional lives of animals, if you don't want to accept the research, we being keepers over them becomes a problem. So now, it's funny because when you ask people who don't even go as far as I'm going with this whole notion, there are a lot of people who really think, and in fact, businessmen, all kinds of people who really think that actually pet keeping is just going to fall out of fashion. It came in as a fashion in the 1970s, and it's probably going to fall back out. And I actually believe that. Okay, that eventually down the line, it is going to fall out of fashion. And I hope that it falls out of fashion, dare I say, and this is my own opinion, dare I say, as humans become more emotionally intelligent, shall we say, as humans become more, in line with their own biological functions, and then they can recognize and have a desire to respect and act upon the biological functions of other life. That's what I hope. Again, I am not saying that you should go set your dog free. I am not saying that you should not have a dog. I am not saying that you should not have a cat. I am not saying you should set your cat free. In fact, because of, to some degree, questions of stewardship come up and all this, I am asking you to consider the big questions here. That's all I'm doing. You don't have to agree with me. Because we could get into, is it unethical to try and rescue, say, a bird that has a damaged wing, or an animal that, like a cat that's missing an eye? These things happen, and people will take them in and do their best, to take care of them. And you'll hear from the veterinarian all the time. They'll say, wow, if you didn't rescue this animal, they would have died. I'm not saying that any of that is a bad thing, and that if you take them into your home and give them a life. I mean, this is so to get into. What was it? The New York Times, I think it was. The New York Times, they did an article, or they fielded submissions for an editorial piece of why is it ethical to eat animals and why not is it ethical to eat animals. And the best example given, and I've talked about this before because, I used to be a meat eater, so I get it. The best example that was given, I think, to the New York Times was basically that the ethical reason for eating other life is that it's, killing them quickly when hunting and eating them is a far kinder death, a less painful death than what that animal would probably experience, either from getting killed and eaten slowly, right? Or reverse those terms, eaten and killed slowly by another animal, or from starvation, which is probably how most animals die. It's not even a matter of like disease or old age. They'll often just die from straight up starvation. Okay. So we are giving them a better death than they would have in nature by killing them and, by hunting them and then eating them. Okay. And most people that wrote in said, oh, no, we know that like there are major problems with how farms are handling animals and, not just like because look, it's not Smallville, right? Like we're talking about these massive operations, where cows have like not even a foot from ass to mouth, you know what I mean? Like they have no room whatsoever. And it's just like these crazy, and we know, and this is the other funny thing too, like even people who like people are on the carnivore diet and everything, you can present them the evidence of, and they'll recognize it and they'll espouse it themselves that, having cows grow up and be, milked and eventually slaughtered, in these little, 5x5 boxes that they can't even walk around in or whatever, that the effects of living such a, they'll even use the term, a depressing existence, right? Makes for less nutritious meat overall, right? Like, they recognize that that's pretty much admitting that animals have emotional lives, right? And so it's ironic because then, they turn around and just eat them. So, even you'll get your paleo people, all of them, they're like, yeah, we want free range animals, cage free animals and blah, blah, because we know that makes for more nutritious, a healthier animal is a more nutritious animal and blah, blah, blah. They're making their own case against it, right? Against eating them because they're admitting that they, that they experience, emotional well-being and that directly affects their health, which is the argument of why, humans need to have autonomy and shouldn't be in cages and so on, because it's key to our emotional health, which is key to our physical health. Because as we say often on the show, the idea that mind and body are two separate things is horseshit. It is mind-body. It is mind-body. We should never really use those terms separately. So, keeping pets, keeping other life forms from expressing themselves, whatever instinctually or from getting to their potential or whatever. Does that become an ethical issue? You don't have to agree with me. You don't have to stop patronizing or, being a patron of me because holy shit, the Golden State boy, if me saying crazy things is enough for you to stop or to quit whatever, and stop listening to me, baby, let me know, because I've got a slew of crazy ideas that I cannot wait to unleash upon the world. You think this is crazy? Oh, baby. Imagine the things I don't say. Actually, here, for example, Ellen and I have had this conversation. I don't think she'll mind that I bring this up. Ellen and I have had the conversation that, maybe even plants. And of course, what do we do at this stage, right? Because if you can't eat, if you choose not to eat animals anymore, Okay. I mean, because look, there are those moments in life where survival, what do? Is it better to die off than eat a, whatever you find in the woods, because that's all that's there? Do you not eat even the grub, the insect, and die? Well, that gets into a whole other conversation. Okay. But again, I mean, we don't really you don't have to go there in this day and age, right? Anyway, we're not, I'm not going to go there, because this isn't meant to be a question of vegetarianism versus eating meat. This is about the ethics of keeping a pet. All right. But Ellen and I have had the conversation in the past where, and we still talk about it and kind of debate back and forth on it, that perhaps plants really are sentient, maybe even more, that we don't understand. I mean, as we discover more about or even, things like mushrooms, like mycelia, and so on. We are exploring, we have a lot of big questions that we need to, at the very least, try to explore these questions, try to find some kind of answers. It is the pursuit of truth, like we were talking about earlier with the experience machine, is in itself a pleasure and worthwhile. It is in itself, I would say, a healthy expression of being a human being. And it's worthwhile to ask these things and to look into these things and not to ignore them and not to say, well, but this is how it is, so we're just going to keep it going. That's how we end up becoming the kept by the keepers and not allowed to truly flourish as what we are. So going down these roads is a very helpful thing. But yeah, we discuss it sometimes. It's like maybe plants, have some kind of intelligence. Fine, you can think that's crazy all you want. But so what? Who the fuck are you to tell me tell me or Ellen how we can spend our time, what we can talk about and what we can't talk about? And if we want to go full crazy, go full crazy. When people, want to question everything, I mean, that's how we end up with half of the wonderful things that you probably think are fucking wonderful things. And you go forward. I mean, can you, when you don't bother to question the big stuff, this is how you don't, I mean, what, did you enjoy watching Netflix? I could tell you about an entrepreneur from the 1980s who had the idea, hey, how about we transmit video over, how about we have basically he was recommending doing streaming audio like Spotify. He was talking about streaming video over computer networks. He says, yeah, I think this would be a really big idea. Nobody bought into it at the time. It's a guy named Bill. All right. And anyway, I've done a full write-up on this guy. Don't need to go there. But my point being is that he was told in the 1980s by the record industry and whoever else, no, that won't work. You're insane. Shut the fuck up. And then it took Steve Case at the guy's funeral to finally say, hey, he's the one that came up with all this brilliant shit you're doing on the internet. He's the guy that came up with AOL. I just kind of carried the torch and etc. So fine. People that want to ask crazy questions, go ahead. You shut them up too. Go for it. Anyway, so ending this off. I get tired of this. Ending this off. Asking the big questions, which I've enjoyed doing lately, like, is the internet a living organism, blah, blah, blah. I mean, these are things that I think it's time we have evidence. We're starting to have evidence to where we can really come up with intelligent answers and not just raw speculation, or at least intelligent possibilities and not just rampant speculation, to these questions. Do I think it's ethical to keep pets? It is not a simple yes or no. Like I said, you have to consider what is the species, okay? For example, dogs following you around because you're leaving your bones all over the place or whatever, or there's food outside and you dump food outside or something and dogs come by. What is unethical about that? But in many ways, that qualifies as what we would consider keeping a pet. Okay, there's nothing unethical about doing that. I know a guy in Amsterdam, actually, who he has his apartment is right by the river. In fact, his back door goes right into the river, literally. And swans, beautiful. They come by. He has gotten to the point where there's a specific swan. He knows exactly what it looks like. It has a very unique bill. And he will feed it some cabbage and he'll drop some cabbage out. He doesn't keep the swan, but after a fashion, that swan keeps coming back like every day or however many times, and he keeps giving it some food and away it goes. Now, I mean, this gets into a complex scenario too. Again, this is why we have to consider species, okay, in that putting out a bird feeder, in my opinion, I think, well, here, I'll say this, unless you are going to put that bird feeder out for the rest of your fucking life, I debate the ethics of that. And I say that I debated the ethics of that, and I've brought this up on Sovereign Tech before, even when I would eat the shit out of meat. Because birds, when they are migrating, at least in the United States, and geography is another thing you have to consider too. Birds in the United States, north to south, I mean, around the world they do this, but there's very specific, say, marshland, okay, that birds like to rest on when they are coming from, say, Canada and going down to Mexico. All right. So is building on top of that marshland an issue? That's all I'm going to say. Now, but the other thing is that birds have great memories. Okay. And I mean, we even know that they can regenerate brain cells, which is a trick we've been trying to learn from them, I guess, to deal with alcoholism, but whatever. Birds have great memories, and they will remember as they migrate. They will remember, if you have a bird feeder out, that they can stop at your house to get that bird feed. Now, what will they do? They will eventually pattern their, migration up, north and south. They will pattern it after the fact on a long enough timeline that they expect at your house to be bird feed. Okay? So if you just one year decide, I'm tired of laying out, putting out bird feed, I'm done with this, or you don't maintain it or whatever, you just sentenced probably an entire flock of birds to death because they were counting on your house, your bird feeder. Is that okay? I think that if you don't consider that, if you don't consider the responsibility of what you're doing when you put out a bird feeder like that, I mean, we don't even have to use terms like ethical and unethical. You're an asshole. If you know that, if you're aware of that, and guess what? I just made you aware. So think about it. I say that, I would have told you that even as a meat eater. So don't give me this vegetarian vegan crap. Don't start laying that shit on me. I've said this for years and years and years. I got in massive arguments with my ex-mother-in-law over this. I'm like, no, if you can't maintain the bird feeder yourself, like you can't put that on kids to do, okay? Because they're kids and they need to have autonomy as well. You can't force them to maintain this fucking thing. If you can't do it yourself, don't do it, because I don't want to be responsible for a bunch of dead birds that didn't need to die in the first place. I kind of like seeing them flying overhead and being healthy and happy. I don't know about you. Maybe you don't like birds. Maybe, a bird, poked your eye out or something when you were young, and so now you hate birds. Okay, then I guess you're going to do that for them. Wow, way to go. How fucking mature of you. Anyway, you get my point, is that even when I would eat meat all the time, I'd say, bring me the live cow, I'll carve off what I want, and I'll ride the rest home. All right, I would still tell you that you're a fucking asshole if you're not going to maintain a bird feeder. Okay? All right, good. We got that leveled out. Because I'm just waiting for the accusations. And that's fine. If you want to have if you have responses to this, please bring them on. I would love to have this intelligent conversation, because again, I am basically asking the questions. I am giving you my thoughts on it, possibilities, scenarios, and opinions, but no one human being could possibly have all the answers to this, because again, by species, it differs, which it's different, which is what I am expressing to you right now. Now, where do things get in other ways that they would get questionable? I think that if you are, say like with, some animals, I feel like we have gotten to the point where we've domesticated them heavily over thousands and thousands of years. And what do we do about that? Well, those are questions that we need to answer, right? Like say with, we don't have wild cows anymore. I think cats would probably do well on their own if that stopped. Again, pet keeping you have to grasp this. Pet keeping came in as a fashion, and it will probably go out as one. But that's the thing, is that what I'm saying to you is probably so anathema to you because you don't realize that it came in as a fashion. and that it's going to go out as one. Or that you can't even consider that it's going to go out as one. And again, I know my listeners are intelligent and I know you're open-minded, so I'm not speaking to you. Maybe this episode will end up going out in the open. I think it's a conversation that needs to be. Maybe I'll turn it into a video and put it up on some site or something. So in some ways I'm speaking to that. Okay. But it's very much case by case. But the modern concept of pet keeping, okay, where there isn't a relationship, all right, like a mutually beneficial relationship that does not interfere with the potential of one or the other, I think that becomes a problem. And look, pet keeping can, in my opinion, can be just as harmful to the human in many ways, right? Because I think there are a lot of people who become obsessed with pets at the cost of, and this probably comes out of traumatic experiences, which is, so I'm not insulting them. I have empathy for them. Okay. They over obsess over pets because they had a traumatic experience with human beings. And so they want to, I could totally understand that. So they give all of their love, that could be given to a healthy human relationship. They give it to pets instead. And I think that might be creating that's not allowing the human to meet their full potential, right? So, I mean, it's a sword that can cut both ways. So again, the question, is it ethical to keep pets? I would say under the auspices of the modern pet industry, the modern pet industry is just a fucking mess. And especially like these breeding purebred dogs and all this other stuff. I mean, this just talk about, applying human ideas to these things. I mean, because that gets into like bloodlines, royal families and all this shit. I mean, that gets into crazy town. Okay. I'll say this. Okay. I'll reframe the question to try and give you somewhat of an easy answer. All right. And that is, because again, there aren't really easy answers to this at all. It is just like everything in human life. It's all case by case. Okay. But I'll reframe it a little bit. Just as I don't think it's ethical to kick and again, ethics is acting outside of one's, dare I say, healthy expression of biological functions. Just as I don't think it's ethical for parents to be shitty to a child or kick a child to the curb, okay, because they're done with them or whatever. If you had a child, there's a responsibility there, and you've stewarded them for so many years, there's a responsibility. I do believe that there's a responsibility. Calling it a responsibility is a tough thing, but stewardship comes with the concept of parenting. Okay. That's another conversation. Oh, fuck. See, this is so complex. That's a whole other conversation. But stewardship, including with pets, okay, I do think that what would be unethical would be to just, it's unethical, or I think it's unethical for me to keep you, so I'm just going to let you go and be food for wolves, lads. I don't think that's the right move. I don't know that is a healthy expression of a human being. And we got to be careful with how we say healthy and all this. Yes, but I hope you get my point. If we decide that the pet industry, the way we keep pets is not okay, as a culture, as a species, as whatever, as how we want to interact with the universe, we'll go that far, then we slowly phase it out, okay, to where we act as stewards to what we have taken in. And it just slowly gets phased out, but we don't just suddenly toss everything outside. Okay. We don't just, I mean, that's, I don't see where that's helpful in any way. Again, I think that the person who did that, where they said, oh, it's unethical for me to keep this bird, I am going to set it free now. That he even admitted that wasn't what was good for the pet, or for the bird. That was what was good for him. That is what made him feel better, not the bird. So who was right in that action, right? I mean, like that's so twisted. So in brief, the answer is, whether it's ethical or unethical, it's case by case. It's case by case. But the pet industry does not treat things as case by case. It treats things as one size fits all. That's why you have PetSmart and Peck and whatever else. That's like basically the Walmart of pets. And, well, maybe that's where the real problem lies. So anyway, that's it for this Q&A. Boy, did we go long. I am not going to do an album of the week because, fuck, I already went 1 hour and 40. This is almost a 2-hour episode, and we got to wrap this baby up. New Sovereign Tech coming out this week, of course, and we do have new TIE Fighter Renegades planned, so expect that. And I'll end that here. I will see all of you on the other side.